Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Speedrun Insider. My name is CJitsallGewd. Thank you so much for joining me this week and every week. We appreciate all the support. Continue to like, comment, subscribe, download for your cat. Cat can't download, but you can download for them. Rate us, review us, give us 5 stars. If you only give us 4 stars, I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. My guest for today, and you know what? The NBA Jam intros are back. They have been gone long enough. I know popular demand. Well, I'm popular too. So I demand that they're back. So it is time. My guest for today, he may be the coolest cat that you ever did see. The man with his name on top of your leaderboard marquee. He is the frame saver himself. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's my pleasure to introduce authorblues. What's going on, man?
Hey, not too much. Happy to be here.
All right. That was the first bombastic and over-the-top intro in like 4 weeks.
I feel like I'm not matching your energy just yet. It's hard to be thrown an NBA Jam intro and then just, hey, what's up?
No, you're fine. No, it's fine. I have the energy's over here, right? I'm gonna pass the ball.
Okay, yeah.
As the announcer might say, he's heating up.
By the end of this, our scale will tip. We'll match each other.
It'll be a real Tippy Hedren situation. All right, so I have a anecdote I'm going to tell about you really quick, that about me personally.
Okay.
So when I first started speedrunning, my very, very first speedrun was Mario Party 3. And I picked Mario Party 3 because it was the game I knew the most about, and I thought I could play it for long periods of time. And if you're going to do Mario Party 3 story mode speedruns, you do need a lot of time. They're 6 hours when you're first getting started. They're really long. So I was like, okay. And one of the first people to come to my stream was a guy named Silo Simon, who's I've been on the show before, and he's a great guy. So I stopped doing Mario Party after a while, but he would always like raid me, and he'd come in, he'd talk about the game with me, and he was just super helpful when I was getting started. And super friendly guy, you know. So fast forward to SGDQ 2019, I'd been speedrunning for that point would have been like a year and a half, and I am very loud and I'm very like energetic, not physically, mind you, just like, you know, vocally.
You're bringing that hot, boisterous energy.
Yeah, I bring the energy, right? And I'm a personality, just like a fireball a lot of the time. And he is very like quiet and reserved. I don't want to say demure, but just like he's like the opposite. Like if I'm going up to everyone and like been like, yo man, you need a drink, like pour one out for my man. He's like, hey, what's going on? I'm just watching the people hang in practice room. I'm like, oh cool, man. So he found me at SGDQ 2019 and we hung out, and he says, yeah, I have my run is at it's like 4:30 in the morning. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm probably not going to be up, but, you know, good luck. Thanks. So he goes and he does his run. I was up because that's just how long we kept going. And I'm watching it on the TV in my friend's room. And that run is the most... He was running Trek Extra Large. That run, for the people listening at home, is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
The game itself is ridiculous itself, but the run as it was presented on GDQ, the crowd was singing All Star by Smash Mouth before it happened, or maybe it was after, but they were like singing All Star, which Smash Mouth retweeted, which was ridiculous. And you won't see that in the VOD. But the crowd is like super pumped up for this Shrek run in the middle of the night. and it switches, like they do the thing where they switch scenes, and they cut to Simon's in the chair, and his couch is Author Blues and Spike Vegeta, and I'm like, what the fuck is this run? Why is it so lit? He's got the equivalent of like he got like Ernie Adams, Shaq, and Charles Barkley to like cover the NBA for him. I was like, what is going on? What is this run? So then all of a sudden we're all like super drawn in, and I've seen this run 100 times. If I've seen this run 100 times, I've seen it 1,000 times. It was the most, for like a 4:30 in the middle of the night run, the most lit speed run that was ever on SGDQ in that time slot of all time. That's my declaration. And that's the first time that I ever heard of Author Blues. And then, obviously I was at my state of mind at that time. I was like, God damn, how did he get the best commentary team of like ever to do this? So that's my introduction to you, and that's my introduction to the audience. So there you go. That was pretty crazy.
The secret that a lot of people don't really understand at GDQs is that if you just like come up to someone and say, I've got this run at such and such time, would you be willing to be on my couch? Most people are going to be pretty agreeable. I mean, it's fun to be on the couch. It's fun, especially if you know the game, and if you don't, you can figure it out, or you can play a completely different role. We can talk more about that, but nonetheless, like it's fairly straightforward process. I'm pretty sure Simon was like, hey, do you want to be on my couch? And I said, yes, sure, that would be great. And that was the whole conversation. And I imagine it went mostly the same for Spike. People enjoy being on the couch. It's a fun energy. It's usually enjoyable, and the expectations are so much lower at 4:30 in the morning.
You don't have to bring the A game.
Exactly. I mean, not saying that I'm intentionally bringing my C game to 4:30 runs, but I'm just saying, the stress of being the best commentator in the world just disappears at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, the stakes are lower, and the people are fewer. What is so if that's like the 4:30 run is like low energy, what is the run in your resume that probably had the highest stakes that you were commentating?
So basically there's only two types of commentary that I do at GDQs. I'm either I get invited to a lot of couches as the what's the term that I want to use for it? It's kind of the straight man, in terms of I don't really know a lot about the run, and so I'm able to articulate the questions that a viewer would have.
Sure.
I get invited to a lot of couches for games that, quite frankly, I either don't know or I've never seen. And I don't think that's a mistake. I don't think necessarily people are strictly speaking inviting me just because I have some notoriety or anything like that. But I do think that I have a specific skill for asking questions in a way that like fill in the gaps for someone who also would have those same questions. The other side is that there are some games for which I'm extraordinarily knowledgeable. Like, for instance, I've commentated probably half of the showings of Super Mario World at the past 5 years worth of GDQs. And it's because I am pretty knowledgeable about that game, and I do bring a lot of just like sort of raw knowledge that I can articulate in a commentary setting. I mean, it's one thing to know everything about a game, be able to break down the frame data and things like that, but it's another thing to be able to present that in a way that's actually understandable to the layperson.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand this, and to emphasize this more, there was recently a Reddit thread that was like, I want speedrun commentators and hosts to stop acting like sportscasters. And I thought that what they were trying to say but not saying was like they don't like the routine, but there's definitely a place for like the straight man, the every guy who asks the questions.
Yeah.
Because it gives voice to the audience, because that's how the audience reacts, right?
Exactly.
You think about all the comedy duos, there's one person getting the laugh, but there's another person who makes the laugh stick because they're reacting the way the audience reacts if they were in that situation.
I mean, my example
Right.
is GDQ that just happened. So we just wrapped up AGDQ 2021, and I did commentary for La Mulana, which anyone who knows me knows is my absolute favorite game. I've played, more than 600 hours of it at this point. It's by far my favorite game, and I played it in a lot of different ways, but I've never speedrun it. And the speedrun is just horrendously broken. And I got invited to do commentary for it because first off, they knew that I would ask the right questions. So I, asked, what's going on here? What's going on here? Why did you do this specific thing? Not for every single tiny detail, but for the things that matter. And then the other thing is that I feel like if I'm going to toot my own horn here, I do feel like I do a pretty good job of gassing up the runner. If something cool happens, I'm going to hype them up and tell the audience, you may not realize it, but what just happened was absolutely mind-blowing. That is not the sort of thing that a normal person can do, and this runner's incredible for being able to pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're contextualizing. You're the bridge. You're the glue guy. You're contextualizing for what people don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to describe myself as the glue guy going forward. I like that.
There you go. I mean, at my job, one of the many pieces of wisdom my boss has offered me over the years is that the worst sin in the workplace is that you don't know what you don't know. And that's all you can say about anybody is they come to work and people try to act like they know something they don't know. But at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. Right. And it's not even a bad thing. It's just a kind of a matter of fact thing. The audience doesn't really understand. They don't really understand they don't understand, right? They
Sure.
can see something fantastical and just be like, you just walked through a wall. It's like, no, dude, I had to get that on the exact frame at the exact time. And it's like a 1 in a million chance. I just ran through that fence. It's like, okay, well now you've contextualized it. You've put some pressure on it. In a marathon run, especially, those moments are super hard. Trihex, I think it might have been Simon, asked Trihex for commentary advice. It was either Simon or Josh. And Trihex said, don't ever talk about what just happened. Talk about like what's going to happen next. Because if you spend all your time, because the audience can't go back and see it in real time. So all you can do is talk about what's about to happen. So be like, okay, and if we do everything right, this will happen. And then it happens, and then they clap.
Yeah, that's way more hype than saying, let me go back and explain to you what you just saw for the last 15 minutes.
Which is always and I say this with a great measure of respect for all the people that are in the kickoff run, in the in-person event. It's sort of the pitfall of the opening event at the in-person GDQs because people are still clapping. Yeah. I remember I was the Hat in Time run, I think it was, at the... Which one did they announce Orlando? Was that the SGDQ 2019?
Yeah, something
that had
like that.
The creepy tunnel, right?
Yeah, that sounds correct. I think you're talking about the right hotel.
Yeah, describe for the people.
They were doing some construction, and they had a portion of the hotel lobby was like cordoned off, and the way that they allowed you to connect from one side of the hotel to the other was they built these like tunnels made of plywood that had been painted white, and so you were walking through this fairly narrow tunnel. Couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4 feet wide, with plywood to your left, plywood to your right, and plywood above you. Always passing by someone in those narrow tunnels, like, sorry, pardon me, excuse me.
Yeah, the thing that I loved about that, the tunnels were awful, right? But I loved that hotel because it was so nice. Everything in there was so nice and like actually like looked good. And it just had this really awful shanty town-esque plywood tunnel. I won't call it what I really called it on the air, but it was really interesting. And also that bar was pretty cool. The way that it was like oriented, it was like against the back wall. So like you had this whole area in front of the bar, this like whole open hotel lobby. It basically was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I miss that hotel. I really do.
We could get into a long discussion about former GDQ hotels we miss. There's a There's a
Oh,
long
please.
history of GDQ hotels.
If I was going off of the back of the envelope survey that I've done over the last few years, the people that I've asked what hotel was the best hotel, they only ever tell me that they missed the one that had the food trucks. It was like
Yeah,
the
that
AGDQ in Dulles.
yeah, all of those people were correct. That's the AGDQ 2015 to 2017. That was the Hilton Dulles in Virginia. That hotel was actually really nice. They had a really good setup. The marathon room was fairly far away from the practice room. The practice room was fairly large. Along the way was the arcade room, and they had a really, really nice room for the arcade room. It was just a really nicely set up hotel, and all of the rooms were fairly close to everything you'd want to be at. So, I mean, it feels mundane to describe like the good qualities of a GDQ hotel, but I mean, really, we use the space that we can get. We're not quite, GDQ's not quite big enough for like a conference level hotel, but it's way too large for like a standard hotel ballroom. And so the selection is fairly limited. And so over the past, 6 years that I've been going to GDQs, we've definitely gone through a bunch of different hotels, and we've learned that not all hotels are created equally. I guess that's the answer.
There is some push, I guess, or some clamor for GDQs to not return to being in-person events. And it's not like this like growing movement. It's not a loud, they're loud, but I think they're the minority. I guess I think it'd be interesting to hear what you think. But basically the crux of their argument is that one, they, in the wake of not having in-person events and sort of the speedrun and esport drama that came about via the Me Too movement last year, as well as, or not drama, but I would say
Sure.
revelation. Sure.
Yeah.
Like things coming to light we didn't know. Drama was the wrong word. And additionally, there's this growing sentiment that, and I don't agree with it, but I'm going to present it. It's this growing sentiment that GDQ being an in-person event with no online component vis-a-vis people in Europe can't do runs for GDQ because they can't access the event, right? So like
Sure.
it's being limited, going back to being limited to the only people doing runs are people in the event space. So I'm interested in what you have to say about that, because I find it to be an interesting topic, although one that I mildly disagree with.
I mean, I think the biggest argument against, or I guess rather the greatest argument for being in favor of going back to in-person marathons was, I think a lot of people had the belief that GDQ would not be able to be as effective, would not be able to raise as much money in their online marathons. And I mean, they've proved that at least more or less wrong over the past few events that have been online only. They haven't quite reached the 3-point-something million that the last in-person event did, but I mean, they've both been relatively close, being just short of 2 million, or just short of 3 million. So they've been pretty effective. I do think that there's a lot of value in bringing the speedrunning community, even if it is localized to specific geographic regions, even if it's only really Americans that have good access to it. I think there is value in people coming together in fellowship, for lack of a better word, to be able to spend time in person together and sort of humanize the hobby. I do understand and agree with people who are unhappy with the fact that by GDQ being the de facto standard for speedrunning marathons and being in America, that makes it fairly inaccessible to people in Europe or Asia or Oceania or anything like that. But I do think that, those areas have their own events. ESA services Europe, Australian speedruns services Australia. There are sort of geographically centered events for those locations, and Europeans can make it out. I think, in a perfect world, I think the ideal format would be to have an in-person event that may be like extended by a day or two for an online component so that people around the world could participate. But I don't, while I understand why a lot of people are enjoying the online events because it allows more people to get involved, I don't think that necessarily should be an argument for abolishing in-person events. But I mean, you brought up several great points, things like, there's basically not been a GDQ where there has not been some interpersonal incident, whether it be,
Right.
Harassers in a community of 3,000 people. I mean, there's going to be instances of things like that, or, people who, get intoxicated, or, some event happens, and this certainly avoids the possibility of those things happening, at least, in person. So there's appealing aspects in that regard as well.
Yeah, I do agree that being online only prevents it's sort of like, abstinence is the best form of like contraception.
Sure.
It's like if you don't have sex, you can't get pregnant.
Right. Yeah, the answer should definitely be to root out people who cause problems, not necessarily to abolish something good just so that there's not room for that or something. I think that's, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and I would like to clarify, when I said I disagreed about the accessibility thing, because, I mean, if there's a concert that comes to town, say like Mountain is coming to my town, and I'm like, man, I'm going to stand front row and, bang my head against the stage. If they have a 5,000 person venue and, then I'm the 5,001st person, I can't go see the show, right? It can only hold 5,000 people. There's a greater argument to be made by the fact that they have a weird size issue, as you pointed out earlier. They don't quite need the conference level hotel, but they're too big for the Holiday Inn ballroom. Right. So the greater argument to be made is that you need more people there, right? How do you go to the next level without, like, okay, if they opened it up to 10,000 people, they wouldn't sell 10,000 tickets.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big problem that GDQ faces. Outside of even issues of like renting the space, GDQ can almost certainly afford to rent a larger space. It's a massive organization. The charities that they give money to, the charity that they're raising money for, funds a lot of the process of the events. Like they basically spend money to make money. The charity does. And so if it were reasonable to like rent out a convention center, something like a PAX might use, for instance, then it's not like that's inaccessible for them. But the problem is the speedrunning community really can't fill that, and there's not an in-between. We're already maxing out, these 3,000 person venues, counting on 3,000 people not being there at the same time. By the way, if 3,000 people showed up at exactly the same time, I'm not sure that these spaces would support it anyway. But like the next step up is not just 5,000 or 6,000. Like the next step up is a convention center. So it's a little bit tough to kind of work through the growing pains of this specific size issue.
Yeah, I mean, if at any point the fire marshal walked in at the last 10 minutes of the last run, when you can't even walk in or out of the room,
right?
He might have an aneurysm.
Yeah,
right. It's predicated on the idea that you can't, like, that's how it works, right? Like the bank isn't designed for everyone to go get their money at one time. These spaces are not designed to house the maximum occupancy of the hotel at any one time. Also, if you've ever been to a GDQ, maximum occupancy is more of a suggestion for speedrunners because those rooms are pretty packed.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the practice room at most any time, it's an unlivable space. You have to walk outside to catch a breath.
I say that about the Smash room. Now I have anosmia, right?
Okay, but yeah, I was going to say the Smash Room usually catches a different bit of criticism than just being overpopulated.
Well, you see, when you said catch a breath, right? So
Yeah.
I can't smell. So there's no odor that's going to offend me unless they smell like bleach, right? It's one of the few things I can perceive. However, the air is thicker. It's denser somehow. There's particulate in the air that changes the quality of the air, and I do have to leave to catch a breath every now and then. So, folks, that last Orlando hotel had that great big open space. It was great from a air quality control perspective. We've spent a little bit of time talking about GDQ. I want to talk about when I messaged you for the show. I said you're probably one of the best speedrun commentators that the hobby has to offer, and I meant that when I said it. And I said it was like you and Spike are probably like A and B, right? And you can decide who's A and who's B. You, the people, not you. Yes, you, the guy behind him. I would say that part of the reason that we haven't produced more like quantifiable people that you can point to and be like, you're really, really good, right? Is that people don't get a lot of repetition, right? They don't get reps in. So if you don't get that practice in, those muscles atrophy or they don't develop, right? And kind of like how you said, people just asked me to be on the couch. I feel like people kind of fall into this place where they don't get those. There's more runs and there's more runners. So there's less opportunities than especially a few years ago, where I think a lot of your teeth cutting may have taken place. But the interesting thing that I thought was that you thought it was a high honor that you may or may not be deserving of, and that there were more people on the list. So I'm interested to hear your list. So what is your list of the creme de la creme, so to speak, of the talkers in the speedrun showbiz?
I think that's a really good question. I do think that Spike definitely deserves to be up there. And if, for what it's worth, if you watched AGDQ 2021 and caught the finale with Kingdom Hearts, I think you'd know that J Hobbs is definitely one of them as well. The two of them have an unbelievable chemistry. They work on a lot of projects together as well, which is the secret sauce that people don't know. Inviting someone who's a good commentator is one thing. Inviting multiple commentators that already have a rapport is, that is a next level technique for getting like the perfect commentary at an event. You get two people who already know each other, who already know each other's rhythm, who already know each other's beats, know how to basically fill the gaps that the other person has. You're going to get commentary that people are going to talk about after the event. And so Spike and J Hobbs are a great example of that. But the community actually has a lot of really dedicated, talented commentators. People like Blecky. Blecky is, I think, often my go-to example of like the perfect commentator. His commentary style is very specific. He basically does an unbelievable amount of research ahead of the run and almost scripts it to a certain point. For very short runs, he actually does script it. Like he will write out what he plans to say. I've seen him commentate like 5-minute runs where he's like, okay, and I'm going to start talking and I'm not going to stop before the run is over. And he has just such a densely packed but good amount of information to provide. I think if you sort of stay in that circle, so Blecky is a really well-known commentator for usually retro games. But in that same circle are people like Mythical 9, who's an unbelievably good commentator. Sinister 1 is an extremely good commentator. He tends to stick to games he already knows. I don't think he typically gets invited to a bunch of games he's unfamiliar with, but when he's invited to a game he knows a lot about, things like a Mega Man game or a Punch Out or something like that, his commentary is just unrivaled. But we have a lot of really great commentators. I'm a lot more unfamiliar with non-retro commentators, just because it's hard sometimes to discern the difference between good and bad commentary for games you're less familiar with. But our community has actually a number of people who are really skilled. Extending the list beyond that, I'm not sure that I could name a lot of people offhand, but I know that I've seen some really great commentary, especially just from this last AGDQ.
Yeah, no, everyone on that list is phenomenal for sure. I think that you made a really good point about it's more about who. It's like, yeah, you can get somebody like that'll hit you 40 home runs, right? You can get an all-star, but what you really need is a team, right?
Sure.
And so finding two people that have that synergy is important. I know the best runs that I've ever had, because I also do event planning on a much smaller scale, mind you, but I also plan events, and that the best runs that I've ever had, the chemistry was very obvious, it was very present, and everybody picked up on that energy, right? It's like, oh, this is someone I know very, very well, they're going to do my commentary with me. Like, that synergy works. Or it's like, hey, here's two people that really know the game and really know each other, vis-a-vis, like, akin to other transition here, J-Hobbs and Spike, which, is forged through years of working on projects together.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the commentary that I think I've done that has been the best, like I've said before, I've been invited to a lot of couches before, and very often I'm just playing the role as the hapless bystander who just asks questions when it seems relevant. I was, for instance, I got invited to be on the couch for Visuals when he did the opening run of Hollow Knight, not because I had never played Hollow Knight, I had never speedrun Hollow Knight, but I have the ability to ask questions that other people are going to be asking, and so I tried my best to bring that. But I think the commentary shifts that I'm best known for, the ones that people praise me for, are ones where I'm working with people who I do have good rapport with, like, for instance, being on the couch for Silo Simon's Shrek run, or Headstrong Superman 64 run. Both of those I was on the couch with Spike Vegeta, who it's impossible to have bad chemistry with Spike. He's that much of a professional that it's not just you necessarily have to... it's not necessarily that you have to have a long-standing working relationship with him. I do have a long-standing working relationship with him, but it's not that you have to. He naturally works well with every human. And then, like, my Super Mario World commentary that I've done has always been with a couch filled with people who I've been speedrunning with for the past 5 years. I mean, we're all close friends. We know each other well. We've sat in voice calls for a combined sum of, thousands of hours at this point. We're just friends. And so the commentary is much less stiff, and it's a lot of us pointing jabs at one another and having fun within reason. I mean, that sort of commentary doesn't always land well. Two people who have inside jokes and picking on one another doesn't always work well. But, I think that we tend to balance it against, actual meaningful commentary as well. So it works.
The inside joke jabbing, it definitely doesn't always work. But if you have a long run, like, I do a lot of commentary with my friend Quo. He usually runs, every myriad of games, and I just do commentary even if I don't know the game.
Yeah.
And I kind of do your thing where you're like, oh yeah, what's going on here? It's like, whoa, man, like, what? You just killed everybody? Like, what the hell? But for new Pokemon Snap, which clocks in at like 2 hours and 30 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes, it's a long boy. And that's sort of like, I'm going to just jab at you and we're going to do our shtick and we're going to, like, let the material roll. You can really play the long con on that, because if they don't like it the first time, well, baby, you got another 2 hours and 30 minutes in.
You're 30 minutes in, you're like, if you're not enjoying this now, it's not going to get better, baby.
It's okay, baby. That's my Dusty Rhodes impression. The American dream, baby.
But I think it does work. I think it does work in small doses. Things like, being doing couch commentary and one of the runners makes a mistake and giving him grief for it, but obviously not dogging him too long, just friendly banter. I think that thing can work in moderation. You do it too much and you start to feel bad for them, like it gets uncomfortable, and too many inside jokes and no one has any idea what the hell's going on. But I think you can do it in a tasteful way that really works. Like you can see that people love each other and are having fun, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for in an event run like that. You have like 5 friends on a couch and you want to feel like you're the 6th friend, kind of just hanging out with the buds.
Yeah, there is sort of like, it would almost be, you could never do this, right? Because it'd be dumb. But it's almost like people want the camera behind the couch. They want to be on the couch that's behind the couch,
Right.
That's their spectator mode. So instead, they're watching from in front of you, because obviously that's production. And they're with you. That's sort of the I don't know if it's voyeurism, but it's like, they're there with you.
Sure.
That's where they're putting themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do commentary, right? I think that's I think if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's that there's, a ton of ways to get it right. I mean, there's way more ways to get it wrong, but there's a ton of ways to get it right. And, some people approach commentary from the perspective of, I'm going to make sure that the viewer walks away having no questions. They need to know what they saw so they can be impressed by it. And there's some people who are just, out there having fun with it. That kind of commentary works really well for games that people aren't going to be confused by. A casual viewer may not have any idea what's going on in Hollow Knight or Shrek Extra Large, but they've probably got a cursory familiarity with Mario, so they don't need me telling them that holding Y makes them run.
Yeah, I think too, the number one thing that people, if you're listening to this and you're like, how do I become a better commentator? My advice is to just do it.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's a muscle that only grows from experience if you're paying attention, right?
No one points at all my bad commentary, and I've done way more bad commentary than I've done good commentary. Even to this day, I still do bad commentary. Sometimes I walk away from being on a couch saying, wow, I contributed nothing positive to that. But I mean, it's okay. You learn what works and you learn what doesn't, and next time you don't do the things that didn't work and you try to do more of the things that do work.
Yeah. You just, not to be Sonic cheesy about it, but you live and learn, you just move on. The last marathon run that I did, or the last commentary I did, it was an online thing, and I had done like 4 of that run in the last month, and I'm like tired, and I knew where all the points are. Again, it's a fucking 3-hour run. So I just said, okay, I'm going to try and fix my 2DS. And it just so happened it took me 2.5 hours to try and fix my 2DS. So in between commentary beats, I was giving people the update on me repairing my 2DS. Now, it didn't really work, but the bit worked, but the 2DS didn't work. But it's like, just experiment. I mean, don't experiment on GDQ. Don't do that. They won't invite you back. But find events, just find events and just volunteer. I have There's
a lot of communities out there that run like little weekly, like for instance, this isn't like a specific recommendation, but like if you were into Super Mario World or something like that, there's a community that does ROM hack races that the community's name is ROM hack races, and they do events once a week where they host a race and there are people who do commentary for it. I mean, you can seek out little events like that to get your feet under you. It's a lot less stressful to learn to do commentary in front of 100 200 viewers than it is when you're on the stage in front of 70,000. Granted, I feel like a lot of people get stage fright at GDQ. GDQ is really interesting because very often by design, a lot of people aren't in the actual broadcast room, and so you don't have that kind of stage fright necessarily all the time. And then on top of that, you have no idea how many people are watching at any time on GDQ, and that number sometimes just disappears because like, who cares? Who knows how many people are watching?
Yeah, for sure. I remember like just being like in the front row of a friend's run, and I was like, all right, got to keep my hands in my folded in my arms because I don't want to be the guy with the weird hands.
You make one wrong move and you end up in all the cringe compilations.
Why are his hands in his pockets? Did he pick his nose? Like, I don't want to be that dude.
Yeah,
I remember.
I know that feeling. I know that feeling.
There was a guy, and we were next to him. Not next to him. We were on the end of the row, and he did this bit. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember what year it was. AGDQ 2019. And he did a bit where the camera kind of zoomed in on him, and he did like the dramatic gopher face. And then he took off running. He was a big dude. He took off running, but he fell. He tripped and ate shit. And the camera pans over to him on the ground. And I was like, I never want to be that dude because the camera will punish me.
But, you know, at the same time, don't you sometimes feel a little like envious of people who have that much confidence in themselves? Like, I know that if I were ever the person that the GDQ, the GDQ audience cam ever singled out, I'd probably freeze on the spot. And there's some people who just ham it up. And I want to live that life. I want to live that carefree life. I want to be that person one day.
Yeah. No, that dude had all the confidence in the world. You'll never hear me say, like, he committed to the bit. And it didn't work. But he committed to the bit.
You're talking about it. The bit clearly worked in some way.
It is pervasive in my mind 3 years and a pandemic later. Right? Like, this man earned it. Right? So I don't even know who he is, but he earned that bit. If you're listening to this, you have my respect. Always commit to the bit, right? Even if it fails, always commit. I super admire that. Really do. I am now going to resolve that if the GDQ crowd cam ever finds me, I'm going to stand up, go into the aisle, and try and do a backflip. I've never done a backflip in my life, but I'm going to do it.
Practicing for this moment.
I am committing to that.
Today's going to be the day that I finally do a cartwheel.
I can't imagine anything worse than failing a backflip and not even getting the back motion right. Like, I'm just gonna go up and fall over. I'm gonna go full pencil. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about the podcast that you used to do. And if you can talk a little bit about, like, a little bit of biographical information for the people.
Sure. Yeah, I did a podcast called The Frame Savers with John Carls. The focus of the podcast was sort of like a one game per episode podcast where we focused on a little bit about sort of the casual experience. We played the games and talked a little bit about, what's fun about it, what's good about it, how popular it was. And then the second half of every episode was really diving into the speedrun. So we would study the speedrun, sometimes bring someone on who is really knowledgeable to talk to us about it. It wasn't biographical in the sense of we didn't really talk to people about them. I mean, we certainly invited them to contribute in a human way, but the focus of the podcast was not on people, it was on games. And so the idea is that at the end of each episode, you should know enough about the game that you could go watch a speedrun and be impressed by it because you knew what was going on. And so we didn't, again, kind of dive into like frame data or anything like that, but tried to approach it from a perspective of if you were watching it from the first time, what are you seeing and what makes it an interesting speedrun? It wasn't a tutorial, so you didn't walk away from it knowing how to do the tricks yourself, but we did try to give information for people who found the games interesting, where you could go to find out more about the games, links to their Discord or knowledge bases or anything like that. And it was a fun way to find out about more games. I mean, when I was speedrunning more actively, I was definitely more quantity than quality. I liked learning games. That's always been my favorite part of speedrunning, is learning games. The grind to get the perfect time was never particularly enjoyable to me. I never felt very strongly about holding a world record. I certainly incidentally got some over the course of my speedrunning career, but that was not the purpose. I just really enjoyed the process of learning a new speedrun. And so it gave me an outlet first to hone that skill a little more, to take advantage of the way that I had learned the way that I had learned to learn speedruns. I was then able to articulate it in the podcast, and then also it introduced me to games that I hadn't seen before, so then I could go from the podcast and maybe do the speedrun myself after the fact if I wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. My brain died. Hang on. If I had to come up with a way to describe the catalog of games that I am seeing that you've played and runs of yours that I've admittedly watched out of morbid curiosity, like Hook for the SNES.
That's a good run.
It's a good run. I would almost compare it to like littering. like you're just kind of going out and throwing shit around. You know, like it's a lot of like, I guess maybe broadcasting, maybe the double entendre I'm looking for. You're just throwing seeds into a field. It's a really interesting approach, and it's really interesting that it like is so in line with like your get down, you know?
Sure.
Like the whole like learning as opposed to like perfecting. I also prefer that. I also just like to learn a run, get a time, even if it's arbitrary. Like I just want to get like a 42. It's like 42 would be 400th on the leaderboard. I just want to get a 42.
Sure.
You know, this is my goal.
That's not to say that I never like optimized any of my runs. I've definitely got probably, I don't know, a short list of like 20 runs that I really did grind out and try to get the best time I thought I was capable of. But
is Hook on that list?
Yeah, actually, Hook is one that I put a lot of investment into. It's actually a fantastic speedrun. Yeah, you may not be familiar with the game, but we had a little community who worked really hard on it, and we the world record got passed around, and tech got found, and it was a good time back in the golden era of probably something like 2016.
So obviously there hasn't been an episode in like 2 years, a little more than 2 years. Can you ever see the show coming back? And would you do anything differently? Would you change like the approach of the show? Like what would you do differently if you were going to do a Frame Savers 2.0 or a Resurrection?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of people asked me for a long time, like whether or not I plan to continue doing the show, like if I wanted to bring it back and have another host do it with me. I'm not. To be honest, when I stopped doing the podcast, I realized the percentage of my time I was devoting to it, and that was like one of the big reasons why I didn't necessarily jump right back in. After we took our hiatus, it's one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily like jump right back in is because, wow, it really freed up a lot of my time. I mean, but the audience doesn't know the percentage of your time that a project like this eats. It finds its way into every free space. It's like a gas filling a room. It will fill every available nook and cranny, every available space. I would spend hours a week writing notes and taking down information so I had it available to me. And then, we were like spinning up side projects on top of it. We had started doing like live broadcasts of our episodes. We had started piloting like a record review show where we would take on, new records that had happened in the past week and talk about them and things like that. And it's interesting how whenever a project like that gets mildly successful, you just kind of want to do more. You just kind of want to add a little bit to it. Maybe if I spend an extra hour or two here writing notes, the show will get better. Maybe if I start this side project, we'll expand our reach or something like that. And it's very hard to rein it in. Maybe that's not necessarily a problem you run into, but for me, it was a real problem. And suddenly I was left with all of this available free time. And, even though it was a passion project for me, even though it was an absolute labor of love, I felt my mental health getting better because I had fewer sort of oppressive obligations. And to be honest, I don't think it would be right for me anytime soon to kind of go back into that space. Maybe in the future, if I were to do it again, I really loved the format of the show. We started talking at the beginning about some of the mistakes that a lot of podcasts make, but we were always very careful about that when we ran the show. Things like, since we were a game-centric podcast, we didn't do Super Mario 64 as our first episode, right? That's the
Right.
low-hanging fruit. That's the game you pick when you don't have something better that week, because it's the easy one. Everyone knows everything about that run. The wealth of information is unimaginable. We started with like Biomiracle for the Famicom, like right.
Well, you went the complete opposite direction. You went the hard route.
Yeah. I don't think we ended up hitting Super Mario 64 for like 50 episodes.
We do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Exactly. And I think that helped us a lot. I think that helped us keep our head on our shoulders in exactly the way you were talking about. If you go right out the gate hitting, if someone else were to do the format of the podcast we did, there are people out there who would hit Super Mario 64, episode 2 would be Ocarina of Time, episode 3 would be Super Mario Brothers 1, and then episode 4 would be question mark, where do we go from there? Like, what's the next thing? And we really tried hard to hold close to our chest those big games, so that we didn't necessarily. I think the most popular game we did early on was like Castlevania was like one of the first 10 episodes or something like that. And so I think that helped a lot. And no, I don't think I would change the format. That style of podcast is what I'm better at. I'm not really great at, or I don't think that I would do as well at a podcast where I'm necessarily like diving into what makes a person tick. I'm a cold, unfeeling monster. I definitely understand computers and games better than I understand people. So I think that is the right approach for me as a person.
Yeah. To jump in on a few things that you brought up, there is a lot of plate spinning that the audience doesn't ever see. And for people that are creative, not saying that there are people that are uncreative, but for people that maybe fall under the banner of being a creative, there's this sort of like thing that happens with your projects where your project very well when it works because you know why it works. Or maybe you don't know why it works. But then you have an idea and you realize you can't use the new idea in the project you have now. So, for example, the format of your show made it so that you really couldn't do like a recap show. Felt like a GDQ like wind down show. Maybe doesn't fit perfectly. I'm seeing that you did one.
Yeah, we did those every GDQ, but it was definitely a very different format. Yeah.
Or like you can't dedicate 2 hours or an hour and a half to the Pringles game. Like intrinsically, that game doesn't have 2 hours of tech for you to break down. The world record's 2 minutes. So you can, even if you, put in a little like sawdust into that taco filler, you're not, that it won't happen. Scare money.
What's your favorite Pringles flavor? Once you pop, you just can't stop.
Oh my God.
But I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, that's what we did, right? We couldn't figure out how to make certain things work for our format, so we spun up a pocket format is what we called it. So we would have little mini episodes every other week that we could talk about. I did an episode on Bubsy. Like, there's not enough meat on that bone for a hour and a half long episode, but I can definitely talk about Bubsy for half an hour. Trust me, I can talk about Bubsy for half an hour. We had an episode on Pringles. I could talk about Pringles for 20 minutes. Don't worry, I got you covered. I could not talk about Pringles for 2 hours.
The other thing when you're working on a project like this is that it invades all of your other free time. Like, it is just, even if you're passively thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're just thinking about how you can make it better, how you can improve. what can you do differently? You know, like what can you do? And where can you go? How do you grow? What do people respond to? I recorded an episode. I didn't think it was any good. People loved it. I was like, what about this did you love? Right? And if you're looking at the page, it won't be the one that you think it is. But I'm like, I had a miserable time. They didn't have a good time. It was a pain in the ass to get them to approve the podcast to come out. And they were like, and then it was a success. And we're like, okay, people are really responding to this. What did we do?
And then you worry that now you're going to have to go through that same ordeal for all of them if you want to continue being successful.
Yeah. Or like there's this, I'm watching House right now. I'm rewatching House. House has this whole thing where he's like, if I'm not in pain, can I be a good doctor? And I'm like, of course.
Yeah.
What does your medical knowledge have to do with your? He's like, of course. The answer is he's an addict, right? He doesn't want to give up the pills. Then he gives up the pills, and he's living with the pain. And suddenly he's like still doctoring, but there's this like whole plot arc for like 5 seasons where he's like, if I don't have the pills, I can't be a good doctor. It's like every other doctor in the world does it without being high. What, you can't do it? Like, I'm pretty sure that's the case. So, you know, it's like I can do good shows without them being, you know, painful to me. But it's like if I beat myself over the head, maybe I'll get that good one, you know. And then once you get to the point where you have crossed that line, where you've crossed the threshold where people just consume your show as like a given, right? Or like, I mean, obviously I don't know the metrics for the Frame Savers podcast.
We did,
but like
we did remarkably well. I don't know how we grew to the point that we were, but we were getting, you know, thousands of listens for each episode within the first several weeks, and we had gotten to the point where people were consuming our content as a given, which only felt like it put more pressure on us to deliver content that was worth listening to. Like, if people were going to be listening to it anyway, I didn't want their time to be wasted.
That's true. The pressure definitely gets ratcheted up. But did you ever feel like, okay, you can exhale a little bit?
Yeah, I mean,
like
there were
people
certainly
are listening.
I mean, you know, as with any project, no one wants to say it, but as with any project, you definitely have the episodes where you put in a lot of work, and you have the episodes where you phone it in. And the ones where you phone it in definitely felt like they were less of a nail biter once we got to that point. You know, the ones where I was like, oh, that episode wasn't that great, and we showed up and we did our job, but it was nothing special, and it was like, yeah, but this isn't going to be the thing that ruins us, right? This episode's not going to be the one why people don't show up anymore.
This too will pass, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, the worst thing that can happen isn't that you have a bad episode. The worst thing that can happen is that you stop.
Yeah.
Because then you lose all the momentum.
Right.
know? And then people stop tuning in and they stop looking. It's really hard. I mean, I have a rule that I'm really holding true to, is that I don't promote the show. I'm in advertising. I work in marketing and advertising for whatever, a car dealership, and some work for Toyota corporate. And that's my day job. That's how I make my money. That's how I live. I don't promote the show because I didn't want to be the guy who promotes the show when he has one episode.
Right. Yeah,
and
we didn't start
projects.
Yeah, we didn't start promoting our show, like we didn't start like telling people about it and posting at places until we had a backlog of like 10 episodes for exactly that reason. I was so afraid that we would show people one episode and they'd be like, okay, that's cool, but if you can show people like you got something in progress, I feel like that's way different.
People in this era of like consumerism that we live in, they binge. They don't eat one piece of pizza, they eat the whole pie, right? They don't watch one episode of House, they binge the whole show, right? It's very binge purge culture that we have in the consumption of media and everything, right? I mean, it's America, it's the land of consumption. So I mean, the idea one of the things that I talked about, and PMC Trilogy does the Overboost podcast, and he was on the show a couple weeks ago. And one of the things we talked about was how do our shows end, right? The show has to end at some point.
Yeah, none of us are here forever.
I will not be the same person at 35 that I am at 27. Right? It just like that is a fundamental fact of life. I will not be that same person. I will change enough to where this does not fulfill me. If it doesn't happen before then. So how does the show end? What is my end? And then I want the show to feel like a complete thing. I want it to feel like something that I can come back to and be like, I can present this to you as a completed project. This is who these people were at this time. You can go back and watch this, listen to this, and have that fun, have those memories. And these people have been preserved in that time for who they were at that time. They can change, but that's who these people were at this time. I'm going to ask you this, and this is kind of a weird question, but I think it's one I'm really interested in the answer. You have a podcast that has ended, right? And if for no other reason than it's ended as of right now.
Sure.
Is this a completed project? Is this something that in its final state you could present to someone and be like, this is something you could consume, this is a project in its totality? Or is it unfinished? Or what is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think that's tough to answer for sort of a serial piece of media like this. It's certainly not bookended. We had contemplated for an extraordinarily long time, like recording a goodbye episode. Like this is our last episode. Thanks for all the fun times, but we never ended up doing that. And so the podcast ends with just a normal episode, like see you next week, which is, I think, some people would consider by definition that would make it unfinished. But I think that if you kind of look at it in a different way, did I achieve what I set out to do at the start? I think the answer is yes. I think that I brought a lot of attention to a lot of games that deserved it. I think that the approach we took to talking about those games was thorough. Nothing about speedrunning will ever be terminal in the sense that if we're talking about a game, the game continues. Our episodes say this is what the world record is right now. Most of those are probably not true anymore. The episodes say this is what the tricks are in the run. Many of those tricks probably aren't being done anymore. And so to that extent, I would say that, speedrunning content can never truly be finished. But I think that if I approach it from the perspective of did I do what I set out to do, I think the answer is yes. And in that way, I would say that I do consider it to be a complete project. If someone wanted to go out and binge it, do I feel like they're listening to a half-finished book? No, I don't think that that's the case. I think that it does a good job at what it says it's going to do. You get what it says on the tin.
Yeah, I think about like, as a creator, it feels finished. I mean, I like the analogy of it. It's not a half finished book. It is a serial thing. I think about Seinfeld, and I was a big Seinfeld fan. And when I was a kid, I was watching it on TBS because I was not old enough to be allowed to watch it when it went off the air. And I remember TBS never showed the finale ever, or I never saw it. And so it was years and years, and I was asking my mom, like, what is the finale, and is it good? She said, it's not really that good. It's one of my favorite shows. It was one of my most formative shows at the time when I was growing up. It informed so much of my humor, and I appreciate that show for what it is and for what it did. And the finale's not good. And I heard it in all the commentary and all of the ideas from everyone that ever touched that show. And it was Jason Alexander did an interview for the Archive of American Television. And he said, there are some shows that need finales, and there are some shows that should have just ended on the show. And that one should have been, we'll see you next week. That should have been how that show ended. And I really agree. That show didn't really need a finale. It needed to have just a regular episode.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Seinfeld's probably a great example when you compare to like podcasts because it's serial content. There's not some overarching plot line. It's just a story about some people's lives, and the finale, short of like all the characters dying tragically, like there's like why do you need to wrap it up, right? It's you started off the beginning of an episode seeing the beginning of someone's day, and the end of it is the end of their day, and I mean, the characters presumably go on living after the show ends. So, what do you need in a finale?
Yeah, exactly. Like what is going to happen in the show that puts everything to bed for a show about 4 assholes?
Yeah.
Like
4 terrible people.
4 really terrible people. What informs your tastes? Like, what are the things that you've consumed that really have the most influence over you? And you can go in any direction you want. You can go music, movie, TV, games, streams, whatever you want. Like, what are the things that really kind of inform your creative juices?
That's really tough. I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, I'm certainly a byproduct of the things that I've consumed. I think we all are to a certain extent. There are no new ideas. We're just sort of repackaging things we've already heard. But I mean, growing up, I consumed relatively standard television. I've always. I mean, my dad has very eclectic tastes. I grew up listening to opera and musical theater and classic rock and just anything really. There's a wide variety. And so I think to that extent, I've always had very eclectic tastes. I can see the appeal in things that maybe other people don't. But I don't know that I necessarily feel that I'm characterized by any particular. I can't point to a single thing and say, I watched this as a kid or I played this as a kid and it really just changed who I was as a person. I feel like I had a relatively vanilla upbringing media wise. I had a fairly vanilla upbringing in my life, and I don't know. I'm a fairly stoic person. I use humor as a coping mechanism, just like every other person. It's hard to point to a specific thing, I think. That feels like such a cop-out answer, but I think it's the truth.
In the inverse, I feel strongly connected to like minute gags and random things.
Yeah.
This is a really bizarre example, but there was when Disney bought the Muppets, they made a made-for-TV hour-long special, which was basically an hour-long advertisement for Disney World, and that the Muppets had been bought by Mickey Mouse. And so it's the Muppets Go to Disney World. And it was, I swear to God, you cannot buy this thing on DVD or Blu-ray. It doesn't stream anywhere. I had it, my mom taped it when it aired on VHS. And we had this rundown VHS of ABC of this thing. And it's Kermit the Frog is going to a family reunion in the bayou. And they decide, oh, Disney World is right there. We're going to Disney World instead. And so there's like singing numbers and everything. But there's this one bit where Beaker has a bucket stuck on his head. And he is like, oh, the Swedish chef works at Disney World and he sells hot sauce. He doesn't sell it with anything. He just makes and sells hot sauce. So they give him the hot sauce and the bucket flies off his head because it's so hot. The steam launches the bucket in the air and it lands back on his head because he doesn't move. Right? It just goes straight up in the air and falls back down. Like me trying to do a backflip.
Right.
And that bit, I had that bit stuck in my head as a worm for years. And it was like an itch I couldn't scratch because I could never find it. And also, like, I don't have a VCR lying around or the tape. So I was like, whatever. Until finally, it wasn't until, this is really crazy, and this is just showing how much of a psychopath I am. It wasn't until Charles Grodin died, who many people may remember as the father in Beethoven, the movie about the Saint Bernard dog. Charles Grodin played the security guard in that special, and somebody uploaded it as a tribute to Charles Grodin. They uploaded that special. This random bit part. So I say all that to say,
finally you were vindicated.
I was finally vindicated, and I could recreate the scene that had been in my head for years. And I say all of that to say, I have made jokes about that bit in content that I've made that nobody ever got. Because I couldn't find the fucking special to show them.
I can't believe it. You've spoiled it now. You've finally given away the name of the sled.
You ruined it now.
Yeah.
I citizen gained myself.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up watching like old episodes of SNL. If there was like one bit of comedy media that I consumed, it was probably a large amount of SNL, which for anyone who knows me is probably like pressing a lot of buttons. They're probably like, yeah, that kind of explains how uniquely unfunny he is. But it's true that I mean, that was kind of like my one main comedy outlet for like a really, really long time was old episodes of Saturday Night Live. So I guess in that sense, if there was a bit of media that I would say informed my sense of humor, it would be that.
There's a part of me that's like, you're going to an effort to not carbon date yourself. I'm so curious who the cast of SNL was that you're referring to. Are we talking like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd?
Or I've watched a lot of those, but that certainly ages me much older than I really am. I mean, I'm only 33 right now. But like the era of Saturday Night Live that I probably watched the most was like the 95 era, when Will Ferrell first came on the cast, and you had people like Jimmy Fallon and Chris Kattan and I don't know, Sherry O'Terry. That era of Saturday Night Live was probably the one that I was most familiar with, but it was probably just because that was like the episodes in syndication that Comedy Central had at an era where I was watching an obscene amount of television.
I'm trying to think who else was on that season that had like Chris Farley.
That was like right at the end, maybe a little after Chris Farley, but right at the end of
Norm Macdonald, Tim Meadows.
Yeah, Tim Meadows, definitely.
Kevin Nealon.
Yeah.
David Spade.
Phil
Al
Hartman.
Franken?
That was, okay, so Al Franken was on some of those, but I think he was a featured player on his way out at the time.
I think it's the premiere of that season has Steve Martin as the host.
Okay.
It's a really fun episode.
Yeah, he was the host a lot during that era right then, because he was still at that time. I mean, obviously it was post his SNL career, but he was doing a lot of movies at the time, so he was constantly on as a host to promote his work.
Yeah, and Eric Clapton, if I'm remembering the right episode, he played 5 long years, and I think he also played the closing theme. Like he played with the SNL band at the end of that. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a cool episode. Okay. I'm going to ask you some general speedrun questions as we sort of come to the end of the conversation here.
Hit me. Lightning round.
I'm going to not lightning round, but I'm going to ask you about speedrun.com.
Okay.
Because I think that you can talk about this in a measured voice that isn't reactionary. Or maybe you can't. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. Maybe I'm putting human. Tone in your mouth. You're the computer that doesn't understand humans, but you're also human. So yesterday, and this is going to be old when this episode comes out. But so I guess it was a few months ago at this point when the episode comes out. There was a whole hubbub about SRC changed their terms and conditions. They removed the Creative Commons license from their terms of service. Or the terms of use. They updated the terms of use. They didn't tell anybody. And there was this whole freak out for like a day about they're greedy, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this, and they're heartless wretches and whatever else. And there was this clamor for an alternative. And I walked away with, guys, they don't own your speedruns. You upload them to YouTube and Twitch. This is probably like an API thing. Now, I don't know anything about API. I think API stands for like a piece of the pie, right? I don't know shit about shit. But I'm thinking about this like as a business person, and I'm like, well, they can't own what they don't have uploaded to their site. They don't store it. They have no claim to it.
Well, so they do have a lot of data, though. They have
a lot of data. They have a lot of data.
Which that's what people were complaining about. Not they would own your speedrun, but that they would own the rights to the data that comprises a leaderboard. So the specific times, the names associated with it, things like that. Yeah,
in the panic, there's a lot of people who are freaking out over the headline, which happens every time.
Sure.
As a former print journalist, people don't read
a good headline
article.
can do that.
Yeah. Fun fact, reporters don't write the headlines. Not a lot of people know that. I've never had one of my headlines ever used. But I will say, you're right. It is about the leaderboard and everything. And then they came out and said, just to give everyone the whole breadth of the situation, they came out about a few hours after. I think it was George, marathon restreamer extraordinaire, love George, who made the initial post. But SRC tweeted like, hey, you brought it to our attention that we forgot the Creative Commons license. We're not trying to take your content from you. We promise. So give me your pulse check on the situation and maybe your perspective. My perspective is it was much ado about nothing, but also I don't know how concerned I would be about them taking it because I just assume they already have it. So tell me why I'm wrong, tell me why I'm right, or just give me your overall thoughts.
So the Creative Commons non-commercial by attribution license that Speedrun.com has always been under gives people the legal right to just take their leaderboard and basically mirror it, duplicate it, copy it over to a different place. So if something went wrong with SRC, if they became tyrants, if they made bad business decisions, gambled all their money away, something, the leaderboard could just move. There's nothing anyone could do about it because that's what the Creative Commons license does. And part of the Creative Commons license I just described, the by attribution and non-commercial license, prevents money from being made off of the data. So you share your information with the website with the understanding that it's not going to be used to produce income. And someone had pointed out to speedrun.com, I don't remember who it was that brought it to their attention first. It might have been George, but I don't know who it was. Mentioned to them that posting ads next to the leaderboards was in violation of the non-commercial license. I don't actually know enough about that Creative Commons license to know whether or not that's true. I'm not an expert on software licenses. Please do not come for me. But I think speedrun.com tried to overcorrect really quickly and really incorrectly by basically replacing the terms and conditions with a boilerplate legal one with, we have the rights to do this, that, and the other, and we promise not to do anything bad with it, but it's our data. And I think these conversations are always difficult because on one hand, mistakes like that are important to note because they can be used to do nefarious things. And often it is helpful to assume best intentions, but with speedrun.com recently being sold to a new company, it used to be run and owned by PAC, a member of the community, and it got sold to a company, ELO, however it's pronounced. And now they have new management, new people running it. It kind of came at a bad time for them from a PR standpoint, like to have a new company now own SRC and suddenly change their licensing. also doesn't work for a variety of other reasons too, because everything that got uploaded previously was still technically under the Creative Commons license because that's how it was submitted. Nonetheless, the end result is that they recognize that the overcorrection was indeed also wrong. They were doing wrong before, and they did wrong the second time, and so they said, okay, so we put the verbiage from the Creative Commons license back in. No worries. I think the response was maybe overblown a little bit. I think with anything, responses get overblown. There's a lot of people who don't like speedrun.com for a variety of valid and perhaps less valid reasons. And so anything that they do is going to be dealt with a lot more scrutiny. But I do think that the response was a little overblown. And at the same time, I think that it did need to be resolved. So it's good that someone made enough of a fuss that a response was provided.
I tell people when they are interacting with things beyond an individual, or maybe just even on the individual level, always assume ignorance before intent, right? Like, it's most of the time, it's people being dumb. I remember there was...
I think that's called Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor is never a tribute to malice, but can be more easily described by stupidity.
There you go. There you go. You came up with the fancy term with my folksy wisdom in check. There was a situation up here a few years ago where I live. Essentially, it was a mother and a father and a 4-year-old. The mother gave birth to a baby, and then the 4-year-old and the baby went missing. They put this is also an example of Occam's razor. It's like the simplest solution is often the right one. They put the hospital on lockdown. The police were there. They closed. Everyone was frozen in place for like 12 hours. And what they found out was the 4-year-old took the infant for a walk. And then when they put the building on lockdown, the kid thought something bad was happening. So he hid in like a closet. Right. So it's like the reaction kind of made the problem didn't help anything, right?
Sure.
Also, it was also a very simple solution, right? It's like we jump to they're bastards, they're stealing, they're and people freak out. People have a disproportionate reaction to anything. And I said this to a friend I was talking to about at the time. I said, it's always a 10 reaction to a 5 response. Corporations get no benefit of the doubt, which is fair, right? Businesses get no benefit of the doubt. Everyone is a money grubbing asshole. And, but at the same time, there is the public has a role to play, right? They respond to the stimuli of the reaction, right? And only if it hurts them, because the next top post on Reddit that day, the number 2 post below George's call to arms was, I'm making a speedrun.com alternative.
Right.
I don't know that it wouldn't be better for communities to maintain their own boards. I say that, and I know that it wouldn't, as someone that does a lot of history research for speed docs. But I don't know that they wouldn't be better off just maintaining their boards for their own benefit. And then you could have their own rules, like how you handle situations. How do you do this? How do you do that? Without the all-knowing eye of SRC kind of looming over your shoulder. And yes, it's by the time this episode comes out, it'll be a year that it's been sold. People are so quick to forget all the times that they lost their ever-loving shit at Pac.
Yeah.
Who was just a dude,
yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that it is strictly better, and this can only ever be from my perspective because it's subjective, but I think it's strictly better to have centralized leaderboards just because it makes it easier for people who are it's barrier to entry is the problem it's solving. By having centralized leaderboards and having that knowledge base at least be easily accessible from one location, then someone who's wanting to speedrun knows that they can go to speedrun.com, and that is going to be their jumping off point to any bit of information they're looking for. It certainly in my opinion, is better than the days where each community maintained it through like a Google spreadsheet or a pastebin. I think we're too sophisticated of a community at this point to be living and dying by Google Sheets.
We're in the Bronze Age.
Yeah. And I don't think it would be better for us to go back to that. And for someone to make an alternative, they're just reinventing the wheel in the sense of, if community members make a new speedrun.com, I mean, that's what Pac did. He just made a speedrun.com, right? Like it's the same thing. So I definitely understand why people are hesitant. I think that ELO, I'm going to continue just saying ELO. I don't know if that's correct. I think that they've demonstrated that they're trying to do things in the community's best interest. I think that they also know that they walk a fine line between people just abandoning the site entirely, which, I mean, is already happening. For a lot of people are just abandoning the site. So, if they want to be able to continue to make money off of their investment, then they need trust. And this was not a well-timed decision to make.
No, and you also said earlier, I mean, it just isn't. They have so little goodwill, right?
Sure.
They have so little goodwill, and it's a bad PR move, right? Like a lot of this stuff is just like, it's hard to PR.
You screwed up at the wrong time. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Is the issue. And do I think that they can make a better speedrun.com than it was under Pac's ownership? Maybe, yeah, probably. I mean, they probably have more resources, so it's entirely possible that the site could service the community even better. But it's just bad timing. A lot of people are kind of I mean, for one reason or another, people are sort of like moving away from speedrun.com, like not necessarily feeling like the site needs to be used for their purposes. And there's lots of communities who have completely legitimate grievances. This is not necessarily singling them out. Like the Mega Man community has always been at odds with speedrun.com. And there's like other communities that have had similar completely legitimate grievances with speedrun.com.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that they, I think that they made a real error in judgment at the worst possible time, and hopefully they bounce back from it for their sake. For my part, it doesn't really matter to me all that much, but I do hope they bounce back for their sake.
It also is sort of the unfortunate legacy that the major speedrun websites of their time all die. Yeah,
that's true.
SDA, SRL. I mean, no one's like, oh, we're going to go back to IRC. It's like, nah, bud. that ship is gone. We've evolved. I met someone who was like, I don't really use Discord. Do you use the IRC? I was like, no.
Ooh,
I don't.
That's a red flag right there.
I guess
that's a relationship red flag. I'm sorry. That person is just covered in red flags. You don't use Discord? You sure?
You mad, bro? There are people that have legitimate grievances with Discord.
Yeah.
But I just want the thing that works.
Yeah. Unless you're in InfoSec, I don't listen to people's grievances about Discord and those sorts of things.
My whole thing is just like, why do I buy all the Nintendo games? Because they work.
Yeah.
I don't like Cyberpunk didn't work when I bought it.
Sure.
It still doesn't work. But Mario Golf fucking works.
Yeah.
That game might have dog shit online. It might have no maps, but guess what? All those maps work. They all work, buddy. I can play them. I promise.
Right
same
there.
thing. Just like it's like Smash. Online sucks, but the game works. In person it's fun. I buy Destiny 2, and I'm like, where's all the game that I paid for? It's not here yet. It's like I gotta wait 4 years for you to put the rest of the game in my game. So, all right. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we started to wrap up?
No, I think we hit on all the high points.
We hit on a lot of the high points. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. This was a pleasure. This was a name that I've had on my list for a long time. I'm glad that I finally worked up the courage to ask. That's the moral of the whole podcast, is just ask.
Same as commentary. You just walk up to people and ask. Most people are going to be agreeable.
Yeah, same thing with me. I will do commentary for your run if you ask me, and I've done it before. You know, the job that I do is up to interpretation. But like I said, thank you so much, Author Blues. You were a treat. I want to shout him out really quick. You can follow my guest today on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/authorblues, AUTHORBLUES, Author Blues, all one word. Twitter.com. That's twitter.com/authorblues @authorblues. You can find him on YouTube. The vanity URLs look like they work for him. You can go to youtube.com/user/authorblues or type in authorblues in the toolbar. You can find all of his runs on SRC for the time being. That's speedrun.com/user/authorblues, AUTHORBLUES. So thank you so much, my dude. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. And thank you to everyone that's listening each and every week. And we will be back next week with another great episode, another long episode. Bye-bye.